Imagine waking up completely convinced it's just another ordinary Tuesday. Well, today we're taking a cinematic journey straight back to the year 79 AD. I want you to really immerse yourself in the world we're about to explore. We're going to witness one entirely normal, perfectly everyday Roman morning that hour by hour devolves into one of history's most absolutely terrifying disasters. It's a gripping story about human experience, the sheer unrelenting power of nature, and a civilization that was stopped totally in its tracks. The day starts and the bread is already baking. Seriously, try to imagine the sights and sounds of a living, breathing Pompeii. We're in a bustling city. In a small bakery right near the Forum, a man is pulling fresh loaves from a hot stone oven, doing exactly what he's done every single morning for years. Down the cobblestone streets, shopkeepers are dragging open heavy wooden shutters, setting out jars of olive oil and wine. You've got dogs wandering the alleys, people drawing fresh water from the public fountains, maybe two guys loudly arguing over a debt outside a tavern. It's warm, it's vibrant, it's alive. And rising silently in the background, just to the north, is a peaceful, green mountain. Now, there is a really profound, tragic irony to this entire scene. To the citizens waking up that morning, that mountain, Vesuvius, was nothing more than a pretty backdrop covered in rich, fertile vineyards. It had just been sitting there for as long as human memory could stretch. But the reality? Miles beneath the surface, it was a dormant, unimaginably deadly volcano building up catastrophic pressure. And it wasn't that the people of Pompeii were ignoring the danger, they literally had no conceptual framework for it. The science just didn't exist yet. In fact, there wasn't even a word in the Latin language for a volcano. To us, looking back with modern science, the warning seems so incredibly obvious, right? I mean, just 17 years prior, a massive earthquake had rocked the region. There was actually scaffolding still standing across Pompeii where people were just slowly repairing the old damage. In the days leading up to this exact morning, there had been these unsettling ground tremors, and local wells were suddenly drying up or behaving strangely. But you really have to put yourself in their shoes. To the Romans living there, the earth trembling was just sort of an annoying, normal part of life in the Campania region. So the tremors were dismissed. Nobody recognized them as the fatal buildup to an eruption. Okay, so let's move forward into the afternoon of 79 AD, the exact moment the mountain finally opens. Right in the middle of the afternoon, the everyday noise of the city is shattered by a strange, unearthly crack. It doesn't sound like thunder, it fits absolutely no familiar pattern, and this massive sound just rolls across the Bay of Naples. In the streets, the arguments stop. The merchants freeze. Every single person turns their eyes north toward the mountain. We actually have a historically verified eyewitness account from Pliny the Younger, who was watching from safely across the bay. He described a vast, dark column of ash shooting miles into the sky at unbelievable speed, spreading out at the top like a giant umbrella pine tree. For a brief, confusing second, the people of Pompeii probably just felt awe. It was a spectacle. It completely blotted out the blue sky. But very, very quickly, as that massive shadow fell over the city, that awe twisted into sheer terror. The trap was slowly starting to close. First, this fine, gray dust starts drifting down, lightly coating the streets. Then, the sound changes completely. Light, porous pumice stones begin raining down, clattering onto the tiled Roman roofs. Imagine stepping outside and looking up in total disbelief as the sky, in the very middle of the afternoon, goes pitch black. It turns into night. The air grows incredibly thick, and choking, sulfurous fumes start filling the alleys. That's the moment the terrifying realization sets in. This isn't some weird passing storm. It's only getting worse. Hour by hour, this horrifying, suffocating progression takes hold of the city. All through the afternoon, that relentless rain of gray pumice just doesn't stop. It builds up inches, then feet, totally burying the roads. By evening, complete darkness has fallen, and people are desperately covering their faces with whatever cloth they can find just to filter the dangerous ash-filled air. By midnight, the buildings themselves begin to give up. Roofs are groaning and then collapsing entirely under the sheer, unyielding weight of all that accumulated stone, trapping anyone who decided to shelter inside. The trap had firmly, inescapably closed. And this brings us to an absolutely agonizing human dilemma. Do you stay put behind solid stone walls, or do you risk fleeing into the buried, completely dark roads? Families had to make split-second survival choices. And remember, their logic was based on old earthquake survival instincts. In an earthquake, having a solid stone structure over your head is generally the safest place to be. But this was no earthquake. For the people who hesitated or chose to hide in their cellars, thinking the thick walls would keep them safe, that completely reasonable, historically sound judgment ended up costing them everything. We now enter the darkest part of our story, the final hours, deep into the night of ash. As we move past midnight, the disaster enters its final, fatal phase. The whole character of the eruption shifts. It goes from a heavy, terrifying rain of debris to something unimaginably worse. That enormous ash column that had been climbing miles into the atmosphere for hours, it finally becomes too heavy. It becomes unstable and collapses, unleashing what's known as a pyroclastic surge. Think of it like a catastrophic avalanche, but made of superheated gas, ash, and volcanic debris. It races down the slopes of Vesuvius at speeds over 100 miles an hour. It brings instant lethality. There was absolutely no warning and literally no time to run. For anyone still left in the city when those surges arrived, survival was no longer about making choices. It wasn't about good judgment or making the right call anymore. It became entirely a matter of timing and location, decided in a fraction of a second. They were met with an instantaneous fate, permanently sealed by uncontrollable geological forces that just rolled right over Pompeii and the neighboring town of Herculaneum in successive, deadly waves. Which brings us to the eerie aftermath. A completely functioning city disappears, buried, sealed, and silenced. By the very next morning, the eruption finally starts to subside. But what's left behind is almost surreal. A vibrant, loud, fully functioning Roman city has been utterly erased from the surface of the earth. And it wasn't destroyed the way a fire destroys a city, leaving charred ruins. It was buried under feet and feet of volcanic deposits, sealed tight and completely silenced. The rooftops were gone. The streets were gone. For centuries, Pompeii just became a lost name in old texts, its exact location totally forgotten beneath empty farmers' fields. But fast forward a bit to the 18th century. After hundreds of years of quiet, workers digging a well in the region finally strike something impossible. Beneath the dirt, they uncover ancient walls, then full buildings, then an entire, perfectly preserved settlement. Slowly, Pompeii begins to re-emerge from the dark. And what emerged from the ashes is a picture of the past unlike anything else on our planet. The level of archaeological preservation is simply mind-blowing. We aren't just looking at weathered ruins, we are looking at an uninterrupted cross-section of daily life. The stone streets are still deeply grooved by Roman cartwheels. There is carbonized bread still sitting inside the ovens. Graffiti, political slogans, and painted ads are perfectly preserved on the walls. Coins were found exactly where they were dropped mid-transaction, and household shrines were standing completely untouched. It is a literal frozen moment in time. But as they dug, the excavators found something else among the ruins: strange, hollow cavities in the hardened ash. In the 1860s, a brilliant archaeologist named Giuseppe Fiorelli realized that these voids were actually left behind by the bodies of the victims after they had decomposed. By carefully pouring liquid plaster into these hollow spaces, he captured the haunting, exact physical shapes of the victims' final moments. These are the famous casts of absence. They aren't bodies, they are the exact shapes left behind by lives that were there 1 second and gone the next. When you look at Pompeii today, you are struck by a very specific, deeply human tragedy. Think all the way back to that bakery we talked about at the very beginning of this explainer. The bread is still there. That baker who placed those loaves in the stone oven fully believed he was going to sell his goods, close his shop for the evening, and do it all again tomorrow. It is, quite literally, a morning that just never finished. And that's the true emotional resonance of Pompeii. It's an entire civilization paused completely mid-action. It didn't slowly decline or end so much as it just stopped. Mid-sentence, during an argument in the street, mid-meal in a grand villa, mid-life. The contrast between that warm, noisy, vibrant morning we saw at the start and this heavy, eternal silence is just profound. Take a moment to really let the magnitude of this reality settle in. Thousands of everyday people woke up believing it was just another Tuesday, but Pompeii disappeared in a single day. But here's the thing. Because it disappeared so completely, because it was trapped in this tragic time capsule immortality, it never really left us at all. It remains with us today as this haunting reminder of just how fragile our ordinary moments really are. So what totally ordinary moment of your day will you view a little bit differently tomorrow? Keep that in mind. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you in the next one.